Hey there, this is Dave, and I'm here with another long-term evaluation of a fountain pen. This time I am using a little bit different criteria for choosing the pen, and I ran a survey at the end of last year and asked a bunch of folks what they wanted me to cover. And one of the things that kept coming up was they wanted to see more inexpensive pens, pens less than $100, pens less than $75 even. So the pen that we're going to do today is about a $35 pen. And I'm going to be using it for 4 to 8 weeks exclusively, no other pens. And we'll see how this goes. The criteria was less than $100. It had to have a Western fine or a Japanese medium nib. And it also had to already exist in my collection. And this is going to be a bit controversial, but the pen that we're going to do is a Hongdian 699. So what makes this pen controversial is that it's Hongdian or Moonman. Moonman apparently was its original name, but then there was a trademark clash in Europe, I guess it was, with another company called Moonman, and they wound up backing off on that and coming up with the name Hongdian, and but they still use Moonman in China. So they are known for making essentially knockoffs. Now, they don't do exact copies or counterfeits, but I would definitely say that these two pens are extremely similar. And the brown one is a clone, I guess would be a good way to categorize it. On the left side, we have the Pilot A23, which is a grail pen for many people. I think the price on that is about 280 US dollars. If it's wrong, I'll put it down here. But it has a 14 karat gold nib and is a vacuum filler. There's really not much more to say about it, except for that it's a very fine pen. I've never really liked it myself, although I know a lot of people really love this pen. It just doesn't work for me. I've had the fine and it wrote so scratchy out of the box that I wound up returning the first 823. And unfortunately, that just kind of was a domino. Trying to return it, it kind of soured me to Pilot for a while. But the things that I didn't like about the A23, not to mention that the one I got first was scratchy, was that it's really overly complicated as a filling mechanism for what it does and how well it does it. You're supposed to pull the plunger back and push the plunger down with it in the ink jar. And you can see that I'm going to let go. You can see it going back, and that's because there's a vacuum being formed on that side of the pen. Once you get it in down here, it widens open, and that allows the vacuum here to suck the ink up into the reservoir there. Unfortunately, you don't get a full fill. And sometimes you don't get a full fill if you do it 2 or 3 times. What you wind up doing is trying to fill it the first time, you might get a half full. You pull the piston back, turn it upside like this, trying to make sure that the ink doesn't bubble out of the feed. Push the air out and then put it back into the jar. Let it go a little bit more and you might get a little more fill. I've been able to get, probably 90% full on them. There's also these fillers, which are basically little jars that you put the ink into, and then you put the pen in, and then you turn it upside down, and then you activate the vacuum filler. That works really well, but then you have this messy jar to clean, and it usually gets ink all over the outside of it, and so that winds up becoming just a mess as well, although they travel well. And speaking of that, the pen travels well as well. There's a little stopper here at the end of the piston. You can see it there. And that seals off the body reservoir from the second reservoir, which is down here in the grip section, and prevents the ink from flowing from here to here. That is really great for travel because the pen tends not to leak. It has an inner cap, which is really nice and keeps the nib from drying out. Those work really good on just about all of the Pilot pens I own. I've never had a problem with the nibs drying out. They really seem to seal really quite well. So let's talk about the Hongdian 699. How is this different? Well, it's not much different, is it? I mean, there's a lot of striking similarities. Besides it costing only $35 instead of $280, the clips are a bit different. The Hongdian is a little more curved and has a teardrop down here at the bottom, whereas the Pilot is straight and there's a ball at the end. Other than that, and some little fence posts between the top ring and the bottom ring here on the cap, there's not much different going on here. One thing that I noticed, and I hadn't even noticed it until tonight when I had the big camera light on, is that the finials on this are actually brown. Whereas with this one, even the brown pen, that's exactly the same as this. The brown 823, the finials are black on that one as well. But that is pretty much where the similarities end. And the reason I say that is because this has a feature that I think all vacuum fillers need, and that is the ability to be cleaned out thoroughly. You can remove the top section here. I haven't done that on this one yet because I haven't needed to. There doesn't seem to be any ink residue holding up in there. But down here, the grip section is removable. And that allows you to pull this down and clean this out with a Q-tip or whatever you want to use. So with a lot of the other vacuum fillers, what you need to do if you need to do some maintenance on it, like grease it up, which you should do, every couple of months, you have to remove the nib section, pull this back, the piston here, remove the nib and feed, and then use a syringe or a toothpick to put a little spot of silicone grease in here, and you've got to get it past this wide section so it winds up actually touching the piston so it can draw the silicone grease up into the rest of the reservoir. That's just a pain, and we don't have to do that with the 699. You can just pull this back, stick a little bit of silicone grease in there like I have, and voila, you've got a nice, clean, and recently serviced fountain pen. I also put a little bit of silicone grease here. I wound up cleaning this because this sat in my junk pen box for a long time. I used it once or twice, and I can't even remember why I didn't wind up using it in the end, but I guess we'll find out for the next 4 to 8 weeks. I am totally willing to pull the ripcord and end this one as soon as I wind up having a problem with it, just because life is too short to write with a crappy pen. But anyway, I really appreciate the fact that they've given some thought to how to clean the pen. Okay, so there's an inner cap just like the Pilot, and that is supposed to help keep the nib from drying out. We'll see how well that works, but I can already tell that it does butt up against the grip section here really well, and there's just a tiny bit of extra force there. I'm thinking that the inner cap might be made of PETG, which is a kind of a flexible feeling type of plastic. It's easy to kind of squish. A lot of toys are made out of that. And then the rest of it appears to be PMMA plastic or polymethyl methyl acrylate. This is a steel nib. It has gold plating though. Unfortunately, the gold plating and the silver plating and the engraved design on it are a little bit off kilter. They're not registered properly. So like normally you would have like your gold mask and a silver mask together. But this one, it's like it was kind of cockeyed when they plated it. So there's some overlap in places. But, it's a $35 pen, not a $280 pen. The clip rings, all of them are steel, but they've been plated gold. The engraving here along the lower band, it appears to be laser engraved and then plated afterwards, which I think gives you a little bit of a better finish than if it's just plain laser engraved. And the reason for that is the laser engraving can change the color a little bit, and plus you see a little bit of stippling where it engraved. But if you plate over that, it smooths out that stippling and also gives it the same color. Unfortunately, I don't think that they engraved it deep enough before they plated it, and it's barely legible. So what it says is Wingsung 699 made in China. The nib on this one is a fine, so that's what I'll be writing with this whole time. And I find that the Hongdian nibs are truer to the Western measurements than they are to the Eastern measurements, specifically Japan. Other than that, there's not much left to tell you about the pen, so let's go ahead and fill it and see how much ink I can get in here. I'm just going to put the measurements for the pen as far as the length and the width and the diameter and all that. I'm going to put that on the screen here now. And then while we're doing that, I'm also going to measure the amount of ink that this holds. And then the ink we're going to be using is Platinum Sepia Black. This is an iron gall ink, so you can obviously tell that I really don't care much about this $35 pen. I do care about the writing experience, and having an ink that is both permanent and one that dries fast is important to me. So I do like iron gall inks. The reason I say that that's a problem for this pen is I am almost guaranteeing you that this is just bare steel in here, whereas the Pilot is using a titanium, at least titanium plated piston rod in the inside. So you might have noticed I had a little problem getting the jar open. I'm going to show you a little trick on that. I live up in the Rockies. What we wind up doing when we get jars that are vacuum bound, as this one is, we have a little trick that we use in Colorado, and that is to turn it upside down and then smack it on a hard surface with a little bit of padding. You don't want it to break anything. And that tends to break the seal around the jar. Now the seal might have been from like crusting ink or sometimes there's a little bit of a canning seal on the inside, like wax or plastic, but make sure it hits very, very flat. And just a sharp crack. And that's it. Now I should be able to just pull this off really easily. There we go. Okay, and then on the inside of Platinum, they have the ink miser, which I am so glad that they always add those. Platinum is turning out to be one of my more favorite inks. The last long-term evaluation was for the Platinum Izumo, and it was the Tamanuri Soratami, which is green, and I had the green black. Okay, so this time I got a little more than half, about 3/5 of the way full, and let's see how much that is. That is 1.4 grams of ink, milliliters of ink, same thing. And then let's show you how we fill it up the rest of the way. Now we can pull this back until we've got the piston beyond the ink there. And unfortunately with the vacuum fillers, they can sputter when you push the pen, when you push the piston out. So I like to make sure I've got this here. And then you push the air out, and you almost always get some ink that's left in the upper part of the reservoir. I'm making a terrible mess here. And this is not working well at all. This is actually working worse than it does with the Pilot. But I'm going to go ahead and try that. And no, we still have about 3/5 there. So I am going to try to let this little guy here blot up, and I'm going to show you another way to fill this pen. Okay, so I've mostly emptied the ink out of the pen, and did my best there. We've reset the scale, and I'm going to show you another way to fill a vacuum filler, and that is with a little jar. Now there are two that I know of. There's this one, which is from TWSBI, and then there's another one that's Visconti. The one for Visconti, both of these actually are for not only for filling a vacuum filler, but also a piston filler, and also are designed to be travel jars. Now, I wouldn't use something with a plastic lid and a cheap foam gasket on the inside for travel. I just wouldn't trust it. I'd rather use one of those ink files, the sample bottles. But the idea is that you fill this up and then you insert the pen and then you turn it upside down and then you use the uh, the piston. So we're going to go ahead and do that. I'm going to pour a little bit of ink in here. This is also really quite messy because you're pouring ink from one vessel into another one. And I've never had this be completely clean. So yeah, be prepared to laugh, especially since I'm using a completely full jar here. Brand new, just arrived tonight. I purchased this ink especially for this pen and this review. Pull the ink off of the threads. Very important. Okay, setting that aside. Now oh, there's some ink on these threads too. If you don't get the ink off the threads on this guy, it'll run down your hand. So be wary if you actually are using this for travel and you didn't bring enough changes of clothes, you are asking for trouble. Let's see. I don't know why it's changed weight, but we'll go ahead and do that. Okay. So pulling the piston back on the pen, inserting it into the jar firmly. With a TWSBI pen, it would actually thread onto the jar. And with the Viscontis actually thread onto their jars as well. But these can be used with just about anybody. This is the tricky part because right now we're going to be forcing air into this jar and it's going to want to come out. But since the air up the top here is blocked by the ink is what's going to come out first if it does. So make sure that you've got a really strong grip here. Now, normally I would hold it like this, but I want to show you, want to demonstrate it. So I'm taking my chances here. Now you can see it's already starting to fill there. And there we go. That is pretty close to a 100% full fountain pen. Now I'm going to close the stopper there. There you go. You can see that there's almost no room there. This color here, as you can tell, is kind of blotchy old man skin, or also known as sepia. And then with the rest of the ink, normally you would just put the stopper back in and then let it go. In fact, I think I'm going to do that, or you can pour it back into the jar. And I'm just going to reuse this jar for next time. I'll fill it up with this again because I'm going to be using this pen quite a bit over the next 4 to 8 weeks. Okay, nice and tight seal there. Another ink that I intend to use with this pen is Jacques Herbin from Provence. This is one of my favorite inks. Also one of my first inks. How much did we fill it up with there? Look at that, about 2.1 grams or milliliters. So let's do a writing sample and get our first impression of this. Now, I haven't used this in a long time. I only used it once, I think. And it was with, I don't know what kind of ink, but it was so hard to get out. I did order another one of these. And the reason for that is because I got this brainstorm that with this here, that's removable, I thought, you know what, I could definitely do this as eyedropper filler. I could convert this by removing the rod in the middle and then sealing off with maybe some epoxy that hole that lets the rod run through. So that's what I'm going to do with the other one. And the other one is a clear demonstrator like this one. It's a little bit different. It does have actually, no, I think it's pretty much close, exactly the same. It has the black grip section, black finials, and it also has a dark gray colored inner cap. Okay, so we have the Moon Man. Oh, yeah, okay. I'm just remembering how smooth this was. Moon Man or Junlai 699. And this is a fine, right? Yeah, fine. We're using platinum. sepia black. And this is a iron gall ink. One thing I do with these long-term evaluations is that I will use the pen as it came out of the box for at least a week, just to see if it starts changing over time. And if it has kind of a break-in period, let it go through the break-in period. But then I want to see if there's like a change in the sweet spot, if it has more feedback initially and then smooths out over time, if the tines start getting a little bit wonky. Um, I do all those things before winding up tuning it myself. This one here, I feel like the ink flow is not very consistent. I did do a complete and thorough cleaning of this, so I don't think that uh, the canal at the top of the feed needs to be cleaned, but I might take a look at that and see what the situation is. You can see, well, maybe you can't see, but on the camera, but I can feel that there and see from my perspective that there's a difference in the amount of ink that's being laid down. It also could be that I just filled this pen and it needs to dry out a little bit from being submerged in the ink jar, but we'll see here. Okay, so let's do some line width tests. That's a light pressure, um, another light pressure. I meant to go heavy, medium, and then heavy. Not much line width variation there. It appears to be quite a bit narrower in the horizontals than the verticals. That may be an issue for me. This should be a round grain. This wasn't special. In fact, I rejected a special because it was the long knife version of another Moonman, which was the Moonman that is a copy of the Mont Blanc, the 630. Let's see. That feels good. Okay, a little bit dry in the upstroke in the southeast to northwest direction, but not too bad. Long line in the reverse direction, and then reverse writing. That's actually pretty good. Yeah, that's actually really good for, really an inexpensive pen. It felt like it was an extra fine, not like I was using a piece of rusty fishing hook. Okay, and then some more flex tests here. Looks like I got a little bit of line width variation. Now I'm really pushing down in order to get those thicker lines, though. Definitely feels like a steel nib, and this is probably the type of steel nib that gives steel nibs bad name. I think that there are some really great steel nibs out there. This isn't one of them. I'm telling you that right now. Okay, so let's see. I'm going to do some ink flow testing here. It's not doing too well there. Not very much ink flow. Yeah, so as I mentioned up here, I was getting really inconsistent amount of ink coming through. Normally I like it to be about here or here at the maximum if I, lay down some ink. Some of this could be because of the type of ink I'm using, but I don't know. We'll see. I'm going to try a bunch of inks, but I'm not happy with that. So now we'll do a dry test. I don't think this is going to tell us much. 1,200. Yeah. That's really more testing the ink than it is the pen. Let's see. The requisite quick brown fox. Now, I imagine most of the people who are watching this already know this, but for you new pen acolytes, I guess, you new converts, the reason we use this sentence is because it contains every letter from the English alphabet. Yeah, it's just not that fun to write with, unfortunately. Um, it when I'm saying fun, I mean it's not really behaving well. It's not giving me the same experience as I go like from here to here is fine. It's preventing me from wanting to change directions, and that's why my handwriting looks kind of stilted and more angular than it normally looks. Um, but again, this is a $35 pen, so I'm not going to knock it too hard, right? Let's do some fast writing. Um, First of all, before I do that, I'm going to do some more ink tests. Now, I'm not applying any pressure on the pen. My hand is just holding it here. Okay, so I went to go get my really good pens. Some of them, I used these in the last video, um, to do a comparison of what the ink flow should look like with what I consider to be a perfect writing pen, or close to perfect. Um, so not going to apply any weight. I'm going to just let the weight of the pen do all the work. And well, probably should give it a little bit of a start here. There we go. I'm not applying any pressure. It's a little more susceptible to being off, rotated this way. Um, but this is what it should feel like and how much ink it should be lying down. Not now, I should probably give it a chance because I did let it sit out for about 3 minutes. And see, it's just not writing. We've already established that the ink flow isn't all that great for this pen and it needs to be tuned up. So I will do that. I already did a video on how to tune the ink flow. So it's in the second half of another video. I'll put the link on the screen. All right, so let's do some fast writing now. And what I'm trying to do is see if the ink flow dries out at any point in here. I'm applying a little bit of pressure, about a little more than medium, instead of just letting the pen do all the work, because I don't think the pen could do all the work. Yeah, I really don't like the thin lines. It's working more like a cursive nib, which is not going to work for me. I might actually wind up seeing how the other one works. This isn't a round grind. Okay, and then doesn't seem to be drying out there. That's good. And it's not drying out there. That's good. So it has potential as far as the ink flow is concerned, but um, this that doesn't fly for me. I would like to have actually it in between both of those, no matter which direction I went. But this is feeling like a cursive nib. Shoot. Well, I'm going to use it for at least 4 weeks. I promised, but I'm going to also take a look at the clear one that comes and see how that one works. If that one writes the same way as this one writes, then I'll just stick with this one for now. But, oh, that's something I'm noticing here. Is the body is a slightly different diameter than the rings up here at the top, and it's a little bit off center. It obviously isn't going to change the performance of the pen. It's just kind of a fit and finish thing. But I mean, again, it's only a $35 pen. So I have to be a little bit more forgiving with its performance in that respect. That's about it. If there's anything you want me to try with this pen, or particular ink that you want me to try, or paper, or whatever, let me know, and I will try to cover those over the next month or two and let you know how things are going with that at the end. The last video will be, the second part of this will be a wrap up, and I will go through all of the things that I learned about this pen and whether or not I think it's a good deal. I could tell you right now, $35, it's not going to be a bad deal. It writes and it doesn't leak ink all over the place, at least not yet. I will mention that one of the things that I have read about this pen is that it has a tendency to crack around joints, especially here and along the cap. And also, I've seen that some people have received pens that leak from this area down here. I'm not having those at all. But it remains to be seen whether or not that this winds up becoming an issue on this pen. That's why I use them for a long time, is to see how well they work over time. Okay, thanks for watching. Be well.